Hello everybody and welcome to an extended free preview of this month's episode of What a Cartoon Movie, all about Millennium Actress. I am one of your hosts, Bob Mackey, and I now know about distinct periods of Japanese history because of this recording. And who is here with me today?
Hey, it's Henry Gilbert, who definitely knew about the films of Yasujiro Ozu, as long as you have no other questions on the topic.
As long as it's only about Tokyo Story.
Yeah.
But yes, this month we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Satoshi Kon movie, Millennium Actress. And, you know, we're bringing in the new year with our first look at a Kon movie in the first place. So you're going to hear in this extended free preview a bit of the history of Millennium Actress, where it comes from, about the life of Satoshi Kon, and so on. But if you want to hear the entire podcast, I believe over 4 hours long, please head on over to patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons. Sign up at the $10 level. You get to hear the entire rest of the podcast, plus our extended catalog of What a Cartoon Movie podcast for now 3+ years of us doing this podcast.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's, it's a brand new year. It's 2022. Start the new year right with listening to our entire back catalog of What a Cartoon Movies, in addition to all of the other awesome stuff we have at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons. We go super duper in depth into this film here, as through the history of it, all 1,000 years of Japanese history. And we do just that same kind of treatment to so many other great movies. I'd say over 220 hours worth of What a Cartoon Movies, covering things like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which Bob went super in depth into the history of both the book and the film. Also, End of Evangelion. If you wanted every question answered about what actually happens in End of Evangelion, we answer it in a 5-hour-long podcast there too. So many awesome podcasts are at your disposal there. On top of that, What a Cartoon Movie stuff, you also get our giant back catalog of many exclusive mini-series. We just finished our one about Batman the Animated Series, going into our 10 favorite episodes of Batman the Animated Series, and a giant back catalog, Futurama, King of the Hill, Mission Hill, and The Critic. Look at it all at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons. And also, just so you know, Millennium Actress, at least right now in the US, is available for free to watch on YouTube if you don't own it on Blu-ray or have it on other streaming places, so check it out there. It is a real easy, quick watch. If you've never seen it before, you certainly must, is what I'm telling you. And now, let's get a bit of our history of the late, great Satoshi Kon in our preview here. Well, it's time to finally talk about one of the top auteurs in animation in the last 20, 30 years, Satoshi Kon, who we've never really touched on before in this series. And I will say for this, I did a ton of research. I cracked out the books. I was showing Bob all the books I pulled out.
Henry's thumping a big stack of books over here.
I read through a lot of his older pre-animation work and an entire making of book, and all these many interviews with the late Satoshi Kon gave me such bigger appreciation for him, and also really puts this film even more context in his life as a creator. Kon was born in Sapporo in 1963, part of that, first generation to grow up with Japanese animation as a constant in their life. We talked about this with Hideaki Anno as well, who's around the same age. They were the first otaku generation who always had cartoons and got super into cartoons. As they aged up into their teens, they were ready for more mature cartoons like Space Battleship Yamato, Mobile Suit Gundam, and Future Boy Conan. The late 70s, those cartoons got bigger because the aging demographic of anime fans were still watching animation instead of, becoming adults who don't do that nerdy bullshit anymore. And Satoshi Kon was one of those type of nerds. He loved it. He was very drawn to the world of both anime and manga. In 1982, he would go to Tokyo to study graphic art at Musashino Art University. Many manga artists and animators went through there in their arts program, though I do believe he's the most famous alumnus of it. In 1984, at age 21, while still going to school, Kon was also working his way already into the world of comics. He was sending out submissions for one-off comics to those competitions that are, give a lot of people their first start in comics, as dramatized in the comic book Bakuman. Kon at 21, though, he is looking into this new genre of comics that were going on in Japan called seinen manga, which means youth. That's technically what it means, but it's actually aimed at a more 18 to 40 male demographic. These are the more mature comics, the Vertigo comics like we had in America, that kind of deal.
They tend to be my favorite ones now.
Oh, yeah.
But they aren't localized as often, though.
As I found out, a lot of these ones I had got in the collections, they weren't published in the U.S. until like the last 3 years, and really only then because of their posthumous works for Kon, so they're worth more now. And there's so many. I was trying to look like, oh, he went to high school with this other manga creator in the seinen work. Where's his stuff? It's like, oh, he's done like dozens of series. One got published in America once, and not even fully. Kon gets published his first work in 1984 at Kodansha's weekly Young magazine. Young is the top serialized seinen publisher at the time, and still is. They were the home of Akira by Katsuhiro Otomo, which was the #1 seinen series of the 80s. And Kon was a big fan of Otomo's work. So not only did Young publish his first story, which is called Toriko, or Prisoner, but also he starts doing work at Young as an assistant editor and as an assistant artist to Otomo on Akira. So if you look at his original stuff, you can tell Kon loved Otomo's work and learned so much from him as an assistant artist on him. You want to read his work from 84 to 89 of Kon's? It's in this collection called Dream Fossil, and you can definitely see him growing as an artist, but there's still a lot of his promise and incredible potential right there on the page. It's a bunch of like one-off stories because he couldn't sell a full story in the 80s. And he's doing this while he's in school. He graduates in 85 or 86. So the second half of the 80s, mainly he's working with Otomo. I think Otomo is really seeing that Kon has something, and he's wanting to work with him more and more. Kon in 1990 sells his first serialized work called Tropic of the Sea, which is also collected in the U.S., but clearly wasn't a big seller because it's ended in 11 chapters. And this is when he starts being pulled into the world of animation. As Kon described it in 1999, working on Tropic of the Sea, his first serialized work with a weekly deadline, nearly killed him. Like he said, he was living on almost no sleep, that his work would be basically barely sleeping, waking up, and in this point of exhaustion, not knowing if he was awake or asleep at the same time, gave some of the viewpoint to his future work, this weird in-between world of dream and reality. And he said, like, oh, I'd work till I was exhausted, and then once I finally submitted to my editor, well, then let's get stinking drunk, because this is like the most satisfaction I could feel. And then I wake back up the next day, and then it's 6 more days till the next deadline. And he said that once it ended, he was hospitalized for a month with hepatitis A.
Oh my God.
They said that the nurses couldn't believe how yellow his skin had gotten. Like he was like jaundice. And when you hear stories like that and know how his life ends, it's like, just take it a little easier.
Yeah.
Satoshi.
I mean, pancreatic cancer can just come out of nowhere, and it's extremely deadly, but also a lot of factors can lead to it. This is not victim blaming or anything, but you can see how like a life of poor health can lead to an early death like this.
And just pushing his body over and over and over again. And so, but once he recovered from that in 1990, Kon then was busy again on 2 different projects with Otomo. So I don't know how available this still is in the U.S. I had trouble finding it, but Otomo did a live action film called World Apartment Horror.
Yeah, I think we talked a bit about that in the Akira podcast. And I think at the time, that was maybe 3 years ago now, that was on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, now I really want to look it up because Kon wrote it. Like,
damn.
His is the story. And when they did an accompanying comic for it, Kon did the comic, the one-off comic adaptation. So Otomo's not only got him working on that, but also Otomo, after Akira, he could direct this live action film or direct an animated project. He decided to direct the live action film while just being a producer on the animated film. but he would put Kohn to work as an animator on that project, which would be Rojin Z.
Oh, I'm proud to announce, by the way, that World Apartment Horror is in full on YouTube, subtitled under the account Unmasked Vader.
Okay.
So you can watch it.
If it's still up at this time, give it a watch. I'm going to give this a watch now, too. So this is the very early stage of Kohn's career. As an animator, he is focused mainly on layout and design, which are two of his greatest strengths. Like right on the comic page, like character design, he rules at it. Layout of a page with creative angles and motion and expression of world. He is so good at it, even at this young an age. Just his ability to express perspective shifts, just gorgeous. And so he is one of the better layout guys on Rojin Z. And on there, it would also be a launching pad for several people he'd work with in the future, including fellow manga artist Hisashi Eguchi, who would be the character designer for Perfect Blue. And Kohn on the project would also work with founding Gainax member Takeshi Honda. He was an animator on Rojin Z, fresh off of Nadia. He would work on What a Cartoon Subjects, Evangelion, Ghost in the Shell, End of Evangelion, 1 through 3 of Rebuild and Fooly Cooly. I've read interviews that say like Honda is actually, especially mecha-wise in Eva, very important in the creation of that series. Honda gets overlooked a bit, including by me in previous Evangelion things. But I think he was a key animator for a lot of the Asuka fight in End of Eva.
Okay.
That was Honda too. But he would be an animator on Rojin Z working with Kohn, and he would go on to be the animation director and character designer on Millennium Actress. He's already working with a lot of the guys he'd work with on Rojin Z, which I never saw it. I always heard it was like, it's not as good as Akira, so I never bothered with it in
I know
my youth.
it was like a Sci-Fi Channel favorite.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Which made me suspicious of it. Of like, this is just free on cable. Should I watch it?
After that comes out, Kohn is straddling the world between animator and mangaka, and he says in future interviews he's kind of sad that people just don't even know him as a comic artist anymore, because he always thought like, I'm a comic artist who became an animator, but everybody thinks of him as an animator after that. He would continue that transition though. In 1992 he'd write the script for it, but the film wouldn't come out until 95. He wrote the script for the Magnetic Rose segment of Memories, the anthology film that Otomo did. The last third of it is one that Otomo like fully did, the cannon fodder.
Right.
But Magnetic Rose might be the best one of their. I love all the Memories, but Magnetic Rose is directed by Koji Morimoto, music by Yoko Kanno.
Right.
So it fucking like rules audio-wise too.
I need to sit down and rewatch these anthology films because now they all run together in my head. Memories, a Robot Carnival, and then something else.
Yeah, I mean, Robot Carnival was pretty much Otomo just like, could I do a more focused version of that?
Yeah.
And including the director of Rojin Z did the Samurai Mecha Battle segment of Robot Carnival, the one of the two I remember from Robot Carnival. All those anthologies, that's why Animatrix exists too as an anthology, because of Robot Carnival and Memories. I believe Discotheque put out a Blu-ray just this year of Memories with a brand new like transfer that looks awesome, and Magnetic Rose has all of this stuff you think of with Satoshi Kon. Like it's, you know, about nostalgia weaving in between reality and dreams, tragic women and the men obsessed with them. Though in later interviews Kon would say it was really hard for him to watch it because he didn't direct it, and it's just full of things of like, oh, I would have done this or I would have done that. I believe he did the full storyboards for it and then handed it off, and he went off to work on other projects. So that would not be his first directing job. A couple years after that, 93 to 94, he's in an interesting world of he's working on comics and he's working on cartoons at the same time. On the cartoon side, he stuck around at the studio with Rojin Z director Hiroyuki Kitakubo, and he's working on the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA series, which we did actually get in America.
Yeah, so much longer before the TV series started up.
Yes, yeah.
To the point where I was aware of this because of that OVA series, and then there was like a Dreamcast game, and I was thinking, what is this?
Yeah, what is this thing?
What is JoJo?
And the JoJo things are made, especially that video game, are made with like the belief that if you're playing this, you've read 20 years of JoJo comics at this point. So.
Oh yeah, the comics weren't out in America, I don't think.
No. I for a very, very long time they weren't out here. But he was working on the anime OVA series, and if you watch the Part 5 episode of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure that he did, it is the one that changes the most from the comic, but every addition he makes is amazing. I don't want to spoil too much about JoJo Part 3, but time travel is involved in it, and the way he expresses like looping time movement through animation is just amazing. Like there's this one looping animation bit I shared as a GIF recently. I was like, oh my god. The second I saw that, I knew like, oh, this is the episode Cohn directed because it has this scene in it. And so at the same time, though, he's not just working with Otomo, he's now working with another rising star of the anime world, Mamoru Oshii. And his first work with him is as an artist on Pat Labor 2. A lot of the outdoor and city segments of that he worked on, and that led to him and Oshii actually like forming kind of an artistic bond. They do a serialized comic called Seraphim that then ends in 3 months, and nobody will say exactly why, but it definitely seems there was a falling out between Oshii and Cohn, and Oshii just let it just die. Walked away, and nothing happened.
I didn't know about this connection between the two because Cohn seems like the preferred version of Oshii to me. Where
I think he's better at it, yeah.
The heady stuff he wants to talk about, he delivers it in an interesting way. And I mean, you've heard our Ghost in the Shell podcast.
Yeah. Well, I think Cohn also is more interested in being an animator than Oshii is. I think Oshii was an animator through just like, well, I can't make films, and then once he could make live action, that's what he wanted to do. You know, he didn't want to do it anymore. But Cohn, if Cohn had continued on in his life into the 2010s, maybe he'd have moved into different forms as well. But I think Satoshi Kon was more into being an animator and working in animation. But yeah, so that Seraphim series just like dies. It got published in the same way that Nausicaa got published in Animeiju. There was the expectation like, Nausicaa, this will become a film. Like, this is just a setup for the movie. And then it just fell apart. 1995, after that, Cohn then works on his final work professionally as a comic artist, the incredibly meta opus that it is about a manga artist who is trying to end his series and the characters pop out of the page and won't let him stop. It is about how tiring it is to be a manga artist, how you lose your mind.
It sounds like Paranoia Agent in a lot of ways.
Yes, it is very much a Satoshi Kon work with a lot of its spirit in there. Like, it could totally be a series 2, only it ended on a cliffhanger. And actually in the posthumous release of it in a collection, like, he drew halfway a final chapter that is just extra meta, where the characters meet him and tell him, please finish my story, and he goes like, well, I just got this new animation job, I really don't have time for it, I'm sorry. But in this case, it only got canceled because the magazine he was writing it for, it closed down shop. In the book, he jokes about like, everybody will think I missed my deadlines because I was working on cartoons. No, the magazine shut down.
A likely story.
But
a magazine closing.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, in Japan, magazines are they're
true.
Still going. Opus was left unfinished. So that seemed to line up right with Cohn's big break in the world of animation, his first directorial assignment, and working with a production company that he would stick with till the end of his life. Let's talk about Masuo Murayama, the co-founder of Madhouse Animation. And as a producer, he pretty much, once the place opened, he stopped drawing stuff and just became like a manager producer type, and really good at finding talent. I have to say, if you look at his track record and compare it to all the people that Ghibli tries to make films with and never fucking does, because it seems like Miyazaki drives them all insane, Murayama at Madhouse actually does facilitate creators to make great stuff, and that includes Satoshi Kon. Apparently Murayama saw his work on JoJo's Bizarre Adventure for the episode he directed and thought, oh, I want to work with this guy. We should give a job to him. And so it just so happens that there was a popular book in Japan called Perfect Blue that basically has a story as we know it. And they wanted to make it live action, but it didn't work out budget-wise. So then Madhouse decided they'd take it on, but as an OVA. And it's definitely in the Silence of the Lambs style psychodrama that were very popular in the 90s. And so this was kind of a work-for-hire thing Cohn was going to get assigned to. You know, it's his big break as the director. He normally worked on stuff he wrote, but I think he was like, I'll take it on just to do it. And he worked with screenwriter Sadayuki Murai, and Cohn, another reason he signed up for it was they actually gave him permission to rework it how he felt and pretty much he just like dumped the original book and just kept the finest of details of like, there's a killer trying to get a pop idol and it's a mystery. Everything that has to do with her losing sense of herself and reality turning into television or all that stuff, that was all him. He wanted to test blending memory and fact and getting closest to the mental state of the victim. That's what really interested him. He saw these other like psychodramas he was bored by, just like, Hannibal Lecter, what an interesting guy. Oh, we have to get into his mind. Cohn was very interested in like, no, what about the woman in this, like the victim? How is this destroying her brain, not only to be hunted down by this guy, but also the internet? Like, it was her interacting with fans online who were just like, I hate how she's changed. It like,
even back in 1997.
If you watch it now, you're like, oh, this was about social media before it actually really existed. Cohn is just talking about like early internet now. Like, they actually have to have a scene in Perfect Blue where a character says, here's how you go on the internet, and I bought you a computer for it. Though Cohn said after he made it, it actually made him want to make a blog, and he actually blogged a ton about making of shows, instead of it giving him the opposite reaction of like, well, this tells me I should never, ever go on the internet. But yeah, he was also pretty open in interviews later saying like, I don't like working in the horror genre. It's not really me.
That's kind of why I like when weirdos are put in boxes. Okay, here's the genre you have to play in. So after Perfect Blue, there's Millennium Actress, but then there's Tokyo Godfathers, which is like remake an old Hollywood movie. But you're a weirdo, but you're in this box, and you can't get out of the box, but you can still do your weird things in it. And I kind of like the challenge that they have. And I think Paprika is a very weak movie with lots of really cool visual things. The story is kind of nonsense, doesn't hold together, but he wasn't given a box.
Yes, yeah, it was well, and it sounded like what would have been his last film. It seemed looser, but yeah, but though, meanwhile, Paranoia Agent felt like 13 boxes. Every episode is a box that he has to fit around.
Yeah, and it's great.
I love it. Cohn's storyboards, he's working with tons of great animators, but if you just look at the storyboards for what he was doing on Perfect Blue, everything is there on screen. Like, his visual sense is just amazing. And the film just has so many interesting things to say. And it's also, though, an uncomfortable film. It's another reason why I kind of didn't want to do it on a podcast, because
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yeah. I just rewatched it in theaters and I was like, oh, this is still amazing. But it's incredibly uncomfortable, intentionally so, in scenes of, mimed sexual assault and the risk of sexual assault. It's just, but the film is meant to make you feel uncomfortable like that. In that way, Cohn succeeded very well, but is incredibly influential. It released in 1997. They decided it was looking so good. They decided, you know what? No, let's go for theatrical. We can do it. And I think too, after Ghost in the Shell's success in the US, I think too, Mong Entertainment was looking for like another film just like Perfect Blue, an adult cartoon that was just one film and you sell one DVD or VHS of it. You don't have to make an entire series. It let them stick to their old business model of film over series.
And you can market it to be totally messed up.
Exactly.
For late 90s anime fans.
Yep. It can be sold that way very easily in a trailer, and they did it. It got a lot of buzz internationally for an animated film, released on VHS in 1999 in the US. You know what? I think the two of them became friendly, but I definitely think Darren Aronofsky ripped off Perfect Blue so hugely. Like, there's multiple scenes in more than one of his movies that are just taken directly from Perfect Blue. Like, Black Swan is Perfect Blue.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay.
But that just shows you how influential he was. And I think Cohn and Darren Aronofsky, at a convention, they both spoke together. They seemed kind of friendly. So I don't want to say like Cohn was pissed at him stealing from him. As Cohn came off in one of the interviews, he seemed like he was extra modest of like, oh, I'm not so special that a great director like Darren Aronofsky should take from me. But if you ask me, Aronofsky just like ripped him off and owes him a bunch of money.
I think so. He waited until after his death to put out Black Swan.
That's right. He didn't have the balls to do it beforehand. But yeah, so with that kind of response to Perfect Blue, Satoshi Kon's next work, it earned him a blank check, I guess I should say, to our friends at the Blank Check podcast. Like, so he could make whatever he wanted next, or, well, more freely, not whatever he wanted. But at first he planned an adaptation of a sci-fi mystery book that was big in Japan called Paprika, which he wouldn't get to do for another like 6 years, but he was trying to make it then, but the distributor closed. And so he's like, well, shit, that all fell apart. So here they are, right at the turn of the millennium. In Japan, they respect that 2001 is when the millennium begins.
True.
Not 2000.
The much better year of 2001.
But
they couldn't have known.
So Murayama, the producer at Madhouse, he is like, I got to keep working with Khan. Like, I want to do something with him. What he did so well in Perfect Blue was these illusionary visuals. They, in multiple interviews, they compare it to a fancy French art term I had never heard called trompe-l'œil. It really just means like a visual trick, like a 2D piece of art that looks like a 3D image, like that kind of thing. They specifically said they wanted to make a trompe-l'œil of a film. Take what they already did in Perfect Blue of all of this stuff that weaves between reality and nostalgia or memory, and they're like, make this one all about nostalgia and have it be an original story. So Cohn crafts an entirely original story with Murai, the screenwriter on Perfect Blue as well, and they're all going to work on it at Madhouse. Pretty much the Perfect Blue team just goes straight over to work on Millennium Actress. And it'd also be the last time he'd work in physical cell animation. He'd be digital from that point forward. But if you love Millennium Actress, there's some expensive cells out there you could buy. I failed on a couple auctions.
How expensive are we talking about here?
Well, I think a couple went for like 800. I pieced out to like 300, but not an insane amount. Actually, pretty close to an insane amount.
You could be diagnosed after buying one.
After Perfect Blue, Cohn also said that he really wanted to do a much brighter story. He was tired of the darkness that he had to live in with Perfect Blue, and he wanted to show a more positive relationship between creator and appreciator. He, in multiple interviews, called this the other side of the coin with Perfect Blue.
You can be the good kind of stalker, a fan.
Yeah, actually, Tachibana is a stalker, but his job is to no, I'm a film producer. That's how I found where you live and then went to interview.
I'll stab you with kindness, not a knife.
My weapon is a camera, not a knife. Even more ambitiously, though, Satoshi Kon didn't just want this to be about, creator and fan or about, film and the power of film. He wanted this to be a reflection of Japan's progress, not only through the last century that was ending, but also basically 1,000 years of Japanese history is expressed through this film, because they have scenes that take place in the 1300s, but that were in movies about the 1300s. So it really is a film that spans a millennia as a story.
I think another reason why I didn't like it when I first saw it is I didn't know as much about Japanese history then as I do now. So a lot of the context was missing for me.
I can definitely recognize costumes like, hey, that's from Rurouni Kenshin, or that's from the Sengoku Basara game. Very helpful thing in buying the Japanese English art book for it is that they have an entire 20-page sections that's just, okay, this is the Meiji era, this is the Edo era, these are things specific to the war, and why is this character dressed this way in 1943? Well, here's the explanation. It is also a tribute to Japanese culture. Kohn even said in interviews as a Japanese person, that made him more in touch with Japanese culture, because he'd lived there and grown up there, but he didn't know it as well. He said he actually had to do a ton of research himself to tell this story, and he learned stuff as a Japanese person. He learned more about Japan's history through that. And a key inspiration for it as well was actress Setsuko Hara. She was called one of Japan's first film starlets. She was a very famous actress in the earliest days of Japanese film. Pre-war, in the 30s and 40s, she appeared in propagandist work, and post-war, well, one of her first films was a German-Japanese co-production. Working with somebody who may have been a Nazi, but look, she's an actress. She took the job she was assigned to her. But post-war, she worked with everybody. She worked with Kurosawa. She worked with Yasujiro Ozu quite a lot. She worked on some of his best works from 1949 to 1962. In 1963, when Ozu died, she quit acting. And some speculate it's because the two were romantically involved. That's unproven, and she never confirmed it, and she actually vanished from acting in 63. So at the age of 43 in 1963, Setsuko Hara gone, and she had not made a public appearance since then. When he made this in 2001, Setsuko Hara was still a question of like, whatever happened to that lady? She was the most famous woman in Japan, acting in everything. And then in 1963, she vanished.
We'll hear the ending of this, but in 2001, someone who lived that long ago could still be alive.
So actually, she lived to 2015.
Wow, holy crap.
Yeah, she still never made any public appearances. People only heard about it in the end of 2015. She passed away at 95. Ironically, outliving Satoshi Kon by 5 years, the subject of this film. So Setsuko Hara and other Japanese actresses, obvious example of what they were inspired by here. I'm going to at least watch one of Setsuko Hara's films again before this. There's multiple Ozu films that are on HBO Max. So,
that's good. I've never seen an Ozu. Actually, the amount of live action Japanese movies I've seen, maybe count on one hand, and two of them are like Battle Royale and Houseu. So, yeah.
I've seen a little more, but not that much more. And honestly, of classic films, I'm like most American video store nerds, which is you watch all the Kurosawa stuff because you heard Star Wars was influenced by it, and then you never watch other stuff.
Then you can point out like, oh, that he ripped off the Hidden Fortress.
Exactly, yes. You can say, did you know in Hidden Fortress, these two guys are actually, they're C-3PO and R2-D2. I've watched other Kurosawa films than, I've watched even beyond the samurai stuff. Like, Bob, as a noir fan, you would love... Of course, it stars Toshiro Mifune. You would love his film Stray Dog. It is a great noir film about a really hot week in Tokyo.
Okay.
It's really nice.
I'm putting this on my to-watch list.
But yeah, in Ozu's stuff, I actually am very unfamiliar with it too. I stocked it on the shelves at the video stores, mom and pop, fancy, snobby video store I worked at, but I just never made the time for it. Probably because his stuff wasn't referenced enough in nerdy stuff. His slice of life stories, he should have done more stuff about sword fights that then influenced George Lucas, you know? So production timelines on the film say work began in the fall of 1998. The final draft of the screenplay was completed in April of 1999. From there, in typical Satoshi Kon crazy work fashion, they are animating it alongside him doing the storyboards from the screenplay. And he doesn't finish the final storyboards until December 99, which is when they're already animating a lot of the other stuff. So it's a real putting down the railroad tracks as the train's right behind
July of 01 in Japan.
Yes. And they finished it actually much earlier than that. But so storyboard's done December 99. He decided not to go with the animation director he used on Perfect Blue. He wanted to bring back Takeshi Honda, who, you know, super duper pro, an expert of animation. And Kon said that he loved his elegant designs. He used the term elegant for Honda, though Kon and Honda worked together on the character designs. But he also wanted Honda as animation director because he just could keep the consistency really high. Like, that's one of his best works. And he knew all these other great animators he could bring on to work on the animation side. He basically had 4 assistant directors, all of whom could also just be amazing directors of things in their own right and would go on to be like Toshiyuki Inoue, who worked on Akira, Ghost in the Shell, Kiki's Delivery Service, Eva. Hideki Hamasu, who also worked on Ghost in the Shell. He directed multiple of the animatrix shorts we watched. He worked on Akira and Utena as well. And Kenichi Koniishi, an animator on Fooly Cooly, Eva, and Whisper of the Heart. So these are top-level dudes working on this. All of them, and also Shogo Furuya, this was his first big break as an animator, would go on to work on a lot of big anime after this. And so all 4 of them, though, would work on all of Kon's projects from then on. So definitely, just like how Miyazaki has a real stable of animators who worked with him from like Conan until their retirement in the 2000s. All of Kon's animators on Millennium Actress, the majority of them would follow him to all of his projects afterwards.
It makes sense. They all, not just because he's a director, but the characters all kind of move the same way.
Yeah. They animate very similar. I think, too, they just really like his style. If you work on a Kon film, you're working on one very specific type of film, and I think he could demand like the best of the best work on his stuff. Also, very important for Kon to work with him on this was Susumu Hirasawa, because his music is a giant part of this film, and it was very important for Satoshi Kon to get Hirasawa to work with him on this. So Hirasawa was a pop musician who got his start in the early 80s in like the new wave, early techno and electronica world in the Japanese pop scene. He worked first in the band P Model. If you look up those old stuff, you're like, oh, this is pretty. I really liked his old stuff once since I could look it up. I just knew Hirasawa as a composer of anime
Me
or
too.
films I liked.
I first took notice of him with the anime Berserk because his soundtrack is amazing for that, but it doesn't sound like that wouldn't be your first pick for a type of music to go with that series, but it works so perfectly.
Yeah, well, that's exactly like Hirasawa too. In interviews, he has a whole story in one of the books I had. It's Hirasawa saying like how he first met Kon and how also he's not a big fan of manga or anime. That's just not what he's into.
I thought everyone in Japan loved cartoons.
He did not care much for. Well, also, once he became a famous musician, he was all about expanding his mind, and he became really into world music and just being like a very idiosyncratic artist. Like he worked on wherever his heart took him. He got really into like Thailand. Like he lived in Thailand for a time and was just like, oh, I'm so influenced by the artists in Thailand. I'm going to make music that inspired by that. Or also he's super into like sci-fi novels by like Heinlein and cyberpunk and all that. And so much of that is expressed in his work. You can really hear it. But his first time doing a score for an animated series was the 97 Berserk series, and he'd work on other Berserk adaptations. I think they just reused his music like in a couple video games. There's a Dreamcast game that he's credited
Guts
on.
is Rage.
That's right.
Released when nobody knew what a Berserk was. Wait, who is Guts? I'm just meeting him. What's he so mad about?
I mean, now people still barely know what Berserk is in America. He influenced a million things.
I mean, it's Dark Souls.
Hirasawa was way ahead of the curve of online music distribution too.
Okay.
Especially even now in Japan, most record companies don't like selling their stuff digitally. Like they equate it with piracy.
I mean, I went to Japan last in 2018. It's been a long time, but I went to like the giant tower records they still have, and just floor after floor of CDs.
Which, you know what? It is cool to still walk around the tower records. Which, if online music buying was still more of a thing in Japan, it wouldn't exist. Though, have you seen these things of like? There's a lot of things closing in Japan, even in Tokyo. Like Akihabara, I saw a couple of big buildings. I think of like, oh, I know what's on every floor of that. Empty. It's closed. It's a bummer, man.
Now we can start complaining about how Akihabara changed.
Yes, yeah. But that's a passing of age right there. So Hirasawa, he's also like big into selling his works online or even offering it up like some royalty-free music for use by journalists. Like
cool.
He seems like a cool guy. And Kon, big fan of his work, and he said he actually was listening to his music and wanted to use a specific song in Millennium Actress, but for some reason they couldn't get the rights to that song. So then Hirasawa just did like a take 2 of that song. The song is called Lotus. And then Hirasawa did kind of a remake of that song called Rotation Lotus 2. That's the credit song for the film, which I didn't realize until looking at the lyrics that what they're saying is rotation. Hirasawa, he was like, I'm not really into cartoons. But when he met Kon, he felt like, oh, we have so much in common. Like he just felt a kindred spirit instantly with the guy and became his friend, or he says as much of a friend as you could know Kon to be. And he had in the book, Hirasawa described Kon's work so perfectly. I just love this saying, loving unkindness. Like that's the world of Kon's thing, because the world operates as it will, and unfairness happens in these worlds and tragedy happens in Kon's story. It's not like always happy. But he has so much empathy and love for his characters. The idea of loving unkindness, I really feel that in so much of Kon's work. Like Kon was storyboarding 2 Hirasawa's tracks, and then Hirasawa would write some new tracks for it, and it kind of like work back and forth with it. So Hirasawa's music is so baked into it, and Hirasawa would work with Kon on everything after that. That's why Perfect Blue feels incomplete to me. While I think it has a good soundtrack, not having Hirasawa as the composer makes it an incomplete Kon film to me.
Yeah, like when you see his art, you think of Hirasawa's music.
Yeah.
And the idea of him not liking anime or manga, but liking Kon really makes me feel that the Kon has not been replaced.
No.
Because unfortunately, I mean, it's much worse in America, where if like Disney puts out a movie or Pixar puts out a movie or DreamWorks, it's like, oh, it's for kids. There's songs and it's fun and it won't be scary and it'll be PG at worst. There's Studio Ghibli, of course, not doing as much as they used to. And there's other people making movies, but they're still like youth focused movies. Like Your Name, I don't think Pixar or Disney or DreamWorks would make a movie like that, but it's still about teenagers.
Yeah, it's still about teenagers, and they're all very pointed at Like Your Name, which I loved, but it's about coming of age, like, oh, you're just out of high school, or you're thinking about when you're just out of high school. Same with the Digimon finale movie they did, but it also is very much about like, oh, you're like 22, right? Well, time to grow up. Like, that's the message of it.
No one's making movies about some old lady.
I know, yeah. Well, Cone had the ability to make more of what he wanted and just take risks because it could be sold as, well, it's the new Satoshi Kon film. No, I mean, this is getting ahead of it, but boy, I thought we'd have decades more of just like that he'd be the replacement for Miyazaki, or just like, oh, he surpassed Miyazaki. He's the top animator in Japan, and it's just such a sad world without him in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Hirasawa loved working with him. And in fact, Kon liked his work so much that his final film was called Dreaming Machine, after a Hirasawa song from the 80s. Kon loved that song so much, he's like, we're going to name that next film about it.
And still in like development hell at this point?
The answers aren't happy.
Okay.
I'll get to it.
Okay, sorry.
As for the voice cast, it's honestly, it was done the normal way of like, they had a temp track they animated to, and then they just got the regular anime vets in to do the Japanese voices. You got vets like Miyoko Shoji, Mami Koyama, and Fumiko Orikasa, who play the 3 different points in life of the main character, as kid, as 20s, and as old lady. And then you've got Shozo Izuka as Tachibana, and most favorite to me, Ida, the cameraman. He is voiced by Masaya Onosaka, who is Vash the Stampede.
Okay, yeah, his voice did sound familiar to me.
And also plays Sylvando in Dragon Quest XI.
Okay, I never heard the Japanese track on that, but that makes sense, that voice.
And it also makes sense because I didn't know this until doing the research. Gurren Lagann, the effeminate man in that, he also voices that guy. So he's known for that kind of voice. Sylvando is a slightly less insulting version of that Gurren Lagann character, as I say as a gay guy who loves Sylvando and has Sylvando as my avatar on PlayStation. Like, that's how much I love Sylvando. The film had about $1 million budget, which was about mid-range. Like, in the making of book, the Madhouse production people are like, honestly, we're shocked we made it that cheap. It's really, for an 87-minute film.
That is insane, because if you look at how much a Disney movie costs, who knows what accounts for all that money, but like, you know, Lion King is like a $90 million movie or something like that, or like at least like $60 to $80 million for a 2D movie in America.
Oh, yeah. And then you put on top of that marketing and everything. But I think they really had to keep it low, because once you look at it as a concept, it's not merchandisable. Like, I mean, you can sell a soundtrack and all that, but there's no toys in it. Like, there's no mecha you can build.
There's no sexy person to make into like your model kits or whatever.
Yes, you can't sell any R-rated figurines of it. And so that was $1 million. And they even had, I couldn't clarify too much, but it's just a one-off line in it. I found nothing else in it about this, but some portion of their budget was also a government grant, like as in the Japanese government gave them money to do it, which it is such a story, a cultural piece of Japanese history, that I can see how it was easy for them to sell it for a government grant. You know?
It's almost educational.
So here's where things get really complicated.
Ooh.
So the film was completed in the first half of 2001. It would premiere in July at a Montreal Film Festival in 2001. It wasn't released in Japan until September 2002.
Wow. Yeah, some places I see this movie as a 2002 movie, others 2001. So it had its worldwide premiere in Toronto?
In Montreal.
Oh, Montreal, sorry.
Fantasia Fest. Like
wow.
Fantasia. Yeah, because it was done then. And that's why I consider this the 20th anniversary. Even in interviews, Kon was like, yeah, we sat on this for 18 months, and I honestly can't say why. Like,
wow, weird.
In the official book, it says various reasons it was not released until September 2002.
That seems to be a very loaded term.
Well, I think I have an informed guest.
Ooh, I want to hear this.
It's time for the shocking appearance of the main character of What a Cartoon Movie, Jeffrey Katzenberg.
No, we missed him last time because he was, I don't know, like a teenager when that came out.
Yes.
He couldn't have influenced it in any way. I swear, he couldn't have.
But unfortunately, in this case, Jeffrey Katzenberg and DreamWorks, I think, is the culprit of why this film went unreleased for 2 years in America and 18 months in Japan.
Grandma, can I have the chocolate chips?
This secret recipe moment made possible by Emory Heart and Vascular Center. When Grandma needed heart care, she came to Emory. The difference? Emory Healthcare performs more heart procedures annually than anyone else in Georgia, which means better outcomes for our patients. And we offer advanced and personalized treatments developed by our top specialists that others don't. Like Grandma knows, where you start your heart care matters. Smart Cookie. EmoryHealthcare.org/smartcookie.